Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We are extremely excited to have you all here today for another live presentation. We have a couple of very special guests joining us today to talk about everybody's favorite shark, Mary Lee, kind of somebody who put us on the map. We have Brett, Captain Brett. We have Chris standing by. He should be here any second. And also we have a very special guest that we will be getting to in just a second. But first of all, Brett, how are you doing? You're out in San Diego, aren't you?
I'm doing well, thanks, John. Yeah, I'm out in San Diego right now in my office next to my kitchen.
Are you there?
Yep. Oh, can you hear me?
Brett, can you hear me?
I can hear you well. You can't hear me.
Cool. You're out in San Diego, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm in San Diego, my home right now.
Chris, how's it going? Thanks for joining.
Thrilled to be here.
Awesome. So like I was saying, thank you to everybody who's joining. I see a lot of you chiming in from all over the place. We are so glad to have you here, especially to be talking about everybody's favorite shark. As you see, joining me today, we have Chris Fisher, our founding chairman and our expedition leader. And we have Captain Brett Bride, who's our fishing master, and also the captain of the OCSEARCH. But we also have a very, very special guest joining us today. Chris, do you want to introduce our guest before I pull him up, who's sitting backstage?
Okay, we want to do that now? Sure. Well, we're going to talk a lot about, what was leading up to Mary Lee being caught, and Brett's going to take us through what we were dealing with when we were out there and a little bit about what she meant. But, I'm not sure it's the right time to invite our mystery guest on right now until Mary Lee actually has a voice in the story of what's going on here now. But if you want to introduce him now, I'd be happy to do that. Would you like me to go ahead and do that, or do you want to wait till it falls into the story?
Absolutely. No, we're going to bring him into the story right from the beginning. The beginning. So,
all right. Well, I think, one of the things that really transformed OCSEARCH, and we're going to talk about this, is giving sharks a voice. And when we captured Mary Lee and Mary Lee began to move down the East Coast and people fell in love with her, she began to have her own voice, and it happened really organically with someone who loved sharks and loved Mary Lee and loved OCSEARCH and what we were doing. A very talented, very clever gentleman named Mr. Jim Ray developed the voice of Mary Lee, which is who everybody engaged with as Mary Lee was pinging and moving around, and really brought her to life at a scale that really changed how OCSEARCH engaged with the public and brought awareness to sharks. So Mr. Jim Ray, the original genius behind giving the sharks a voice, with a Twitter handle, the voice of Mary Lee the Shark.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for being here. You have been an inspiration to so many people out on Twitter. I know some of you may want to close your eyes as you picture, you've had this in your head for so long, but Jim, I think it's time we finally take the mask off and introduce you to everyone. Where are you joining us from? Let everybody know where you're joining us from.
I'm at my home in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is right on the East Coast of North Carolina, and very close to where I first saw Mary Lee pinging, and that's how this Twitter account came to be.
And we'll get into all of those details in just a sec, including how Jim was sort of a saving grace for OCSEARCH. So we'll get into that story in just a sec, but real quick, let's go back a little bit to before the tagging of Mary Lee. Chris, do you want to kind of give a little bit of the backstory of OCSEARCH leading up to what happened with Mary Lee?
Yeah, so I don't really know that we've ever told this story, and many of you all are familiar with our work going back. What we were trying to do was give the scientists enough capacity to solve the life history puzzle of these animals, because it requires a ship, it requires people like Brett, and they were all working by themselves in small boats, and so we had to find a way to pay for that. And so in the early years, we made television. We did 30 hours of TV on National Geographic, which was called Sharkmen, and then 10 hours in 2012 on the History Channel called Shark Wranglers. And we were taking half the money from TV to pay for the ship so we could give it to the scientists, and then using the other half of the money to make the show. And in 2012, after the first 10-hour series on the History Channel, they canceled the show. And it was, I think, the second time that we thought, OCSEARCH and all of this work was going to end, because it costs a lot of money to have the ship and operate it and give it to the scientists. And we didn't know another way to create the money to pay for the ship to give it without TV. So we finished that work on Shark Wranglers, which was down in South Africa. And then, we drove the boat home, and at that point thought we were driving the boat home to basically lose everything, lose the ship, lose my house, everything. And but I had promised Greg Scommel before we went to Africa that we would come and try to help him put some tags on white sharks, because they were starting to show up in Cape Cod. We had a little bit of money left from the TV, and I was just like, okay, well, I promised this guy I'd help him. And so we'll go up there and help him, and then I'll lose the ship and my house, and this whole kind of ocean exploration and science thing will be over. And so we went out to Massachusetts, and that was like, I believe, August, September of 2012. And this is going to be weird. I've never told this story. I just try not to get too emotional. This was a very difficult time. I was out there on the boat with Brett and the guys. They were trying to do, we were just, because we weren't making a TV show, I think what really happened when we were making TV shows, they wouldn't allow us to bring guests out on the ship. We weren't allowed to engage with the local community. We weren't allowed to have students out. We couldn't have the local press out. We couldn't have the local people out to let them know what was going on right off their own beaches. And so since it was the last trip and then it was over, I was just like, well, let's invite everybody. I mean, literally everybody. I was like, invite all the press. I don't know. Maybe they'll want to come tell the story and show people what's going on out here. I even said, invite, I can't remember the name of the bar there in Cape Cod and Chatham. The big famous bar. I was like, I want the bartenders of that bar out there so they can see this. So when people are talking about it later, people get the story right. Like, I didn't want any wacky story to come out of it. And so the whole idea was include everybody. And everybody came. But we were out there working, and it was tough. We were working a few miles off the beach. Weeks went by. We weren't seeing anything. I'm literally on the bow with a contender talking to my dad, making arrangements to go bankrupt. Everybody's job. Brett and the guys are working their asses off trying to, just get a tag out, because we thought it would help, even if it was the end, or maybe it would create a new beginning. Everybody trying to hold it together with all this stuff going on all at the same time. And it was brutal. It was brutal. When I left the ship after that trip was the only time in my life I've taken a picture of the ship when I was leaving, because I thought I would never see it again. And we just kept grinding, and people were coming out, and the press was coming out, but there were no sharks. And they kept sticking around hoping we'd get one. And then it was late in the trip, right, Brett? Wasn't Mary Lee late in the trip?
Yeah, we put in a lot before we got her. And,
yeah, suddenly we're sitting 3 miles off the beach, and this big shark comes swimming right out of Chatham Harbor, 3 miles. I remember before we caught it, there was a shark that was in the bay there in Chatham. And boy, I haven't thought about that. We've been so busy in such a long time. I forgot how hard that was. And there was a helicopter over the top of the Chatham Harbor exit. And it was over the top of a big shark, but it was 3 miles away, but you could still see the chopper over the shark. And there we were 3 miles out. We're like, man, I wonder if that thing's going to find its way out here. And lo and behold, it did. And then a whole different dance came about. And I think I'll pass off to Brett now for a few minutes, try to regroup.
Yeah, Brett, I'm curious. So you're working in South Africa for shark wranglers. You get this one last trip, obviously very emotional. I'm curious what your recollection of that time period was like.
We focus on different things. You know, Chris is more in tune with what our overall big picture financially is, of course, and he has a lot of different stresses on him. You know, the one big difference, you know, we were going from TV back to no TV. When we were doing TV, and when we were down in South Africa, we were so busy, so much of the time moving from spot to spot, and we have, you know, the film crew, and that has its own, you know, thing that comes along with it. And then now we didn't have that, so it was a little bit, we were a little freed up, and it was nice to have the people on the boat, but the environment was so difficult. You know, we didn't have state permits, so we were fishing off the beach 3 miles out, which is, you know, when the way I see things, if you're not even a boat length or two away from where I want to be fishing, I feel like I'm on the other side of the planet. So, you know, you feel not really located. You're like, you've come all the way over here. You're close. You can see them where you want to be in the binoculars, but you can't be there. So you're just kind of relying on whether that shark will find you coming through. You're relying on your chum more. But the current there just rips. So our windows of productive fishing are very, very short. So we were, you know, having to fish as many hours a day as we could, try to, you know, do the best we can with the current and the short windows, but you can just never give up, even though you feel like it sometimes. And Mary Lee was one of those. That's kind of our MO. We've done a lot of really good work toward the end of the trip just because of our tenacity. And she was one of the same ones like that. When she showed up, it was really interesting because she was in our chum slick, but she was moving back and forth up high, fin out of the water most of the time, but just clearly looking around, pretty fast moving. And when we got on her, it was, she just wasn't really interested in coming up and eating a bait right away. She was like more interested in finding whatever it was that she was looking for. And she had passed up the bait a few times. But started showing an interest in the motors. You know, that's kind of typical. You know, white sharks a lot of times will come up and investigate the motors because of the electricity signal that comes off them. Sometimes chew on them a bit. So that's how we ended up finally getting her. She came up and was just so close, mouthing the motors and stuff, that we were able to just basically take the bait off the hook and just kind of drop it in her mouth and pull sideways and make sure we got it right in the corner.
So real quick, Brett, I think we actually have some video of that if we want to take a look at it real quick, and we'll see exactly what you mean when the moment that this important shark kind of came in to the.
Yeah, then we'll talk about it some more.
Yeah, then we'll dive into all of that stuff more. But let's take a quick look here at how it all went down.
Halfway between you and your seat.
Heading our way, I think, Brett. What do you think? Halfway between? Coming under to you, Jody. Coming right at you, Jody. She's going to try to eat it. It's in the mouth? Yeah, in gear. OCSEARCH, OCSEARCH, OCSEARCH. Yeah. This is contender. OCSEARCH is contender. We are hooked up. Hooked up. This truly was the most historic, legendary fish we've ever captured. And it set the tone for Cape Cod in a very difficult environment with sharks that didn't want to bite. Before we let her go, I named her Mary Lee after my mother because my parents have done so much. I was just waiting and waiting for a special shark. It's just a historic moment and the most legendary fish I've ever been a part of. Oh, yeah, Mary Lee! Big girl!
I think, you know, when you go back, and we should probably watch that again, it'll make sense to people. But a couple of things, you know, the game of cat and mouse that Brett had to play with this shark, it was around us for a while, and it would not pick up a bait. But every time, if we took a big chunk of tuna on a gaff over the side of the boat and we shook it real hard, shook it kind of like a struggling fish or a struggling seal or something, she would come to the boat, and she would come right up to the boat. And a couple of times she actually came vertically right up the side of the boat to it. And then we would pull it out of the way, but then she would sniff around and not pick up a bait. And Brett looked at me and he said, "Hey, do that again. And when she comes up, I think I can put the hook right in the corner of her mouth," which is not the shot that you saw there. I remember back in those days, we were like afraid to show people that sort of stuff. Like, and then you got people don't remember the early days of OCSEARCH and the extremists. It was a difficult time. And so I shook a big chunk of tuna like crazy. And sure enough, here she came again. And then he just said, "Pull it." And I stepped back and pulled it out of the way. And he reached down with his hand and literally placed the hook in the corner of Mary Lee's mouth. And then she went around to the other side of the outboards, which is where the video cuts to. And so she really didn't even pick up a bait.
Brett,
I believe Jeannie was also hooked. I believe the first 2 sharks we caught in Cape Cod both behaved that way. And Brett literally stuck his hand down right beside their mouth and put a hook in the corner of their mouth. They never actually picked up a bait. I don't know that we've ever told that story publicly.
Yeah, well, you remember back, when we started, we understood how much scrutiny we had, on us, and we were under a microscope, and we had people who were just like, it's a big majestic animal, it's protected, you really shouldn't be stressing them out like that. So we had, we definitely do not want to deep hook a shark. And I remember for years that I was absolutely reluctant. I would not drop a bait out of sight and just hope for a bite. Where I'm going to get more bites. I know if I could drop it to the bottom and have multiple baits out, we're going to get more bites, but we're going to end up gut hooking one or gill hooking one or something, and it's going to be a disaster. So I was just like, we will not do that. We have enough days that we can put out all these tags, or at least enough tags, and not run that risk. That the size of the hook that we had, it was all 27-0 hook back then, because there was nothing else made for us that wouldn't bend when we were trying to bring them in. So you could see how, like, in a normal situation, if you wanted to catch a shark on a smaller hook and bring it up alongside of the boat and follow it to where it led you, you could get it up there without bending your hook and all that. But if you need to get back to the boat, which is not where the shark wants to go necessarily, you're going to have to get them in the lead and put more pressure on it. And that's where sometimes you'll stress that hook out and bend it. And then, of course, when we're coming in, you could see on that video how strong that current was running.
Yeah, the current was brutal.
And how hard it was to get her in there. That's not going to happen with your standard off-the-shelf hook, or even, so I know that a lot of people are, God, that hook seems enormous, but when you put it in the size of a shark like that, then you put that much pressure on it. And then the putting the pressure on it is much better for the shark than getting in some kind of a long, drawn-out battle where you're fighting it for hours. I think that that's where, one of the things I like to talk about is, when we get to it, is the evolution of cutting the fight time down and why and how we were able to do that.
Yeah, I think, and you can see here when it's coming in, I remember you could see the current, right? The whole time we were dealing with Mary Lee, the current was trying to sweep us away from the ship. And so we were always trying to keep creeping toward the ship so we didn't have this big uphill tack at the end. So we were constantly trying to stay close to the ship while we were getting swept away. Once you got control of the animal, we started heading back, and that's where this is. And then, you jump in the cradle so you can get the line on the inside of the cradle so the shark actually comes in and doesn't go around the cradle. And I remember when you see Todd and Jody, when they're pulling there, you see, if you watch what we do, you don't normally see the level of difficulty that we're dealing. Look at this. The current with these guys is incredible. Sweeping, you can see it racing past the cradle. It's almost pushing Brett out of the cradle when he jumps in. See the current ripping? Now we're trying to get this thing up in there, and the current gets focused against the ship and through the cradle, and it accelerates. And when we did this, watch Todd and Jody here. Like, I thought I was going to break their hands. I thought that they were going to be like damaged. Look at the current. The current was brutal. And I remember just trying to use the boat to get in front of the cradle to drive her up in there. And we got her in there, but I got to be honest, with all the sharks, you would know, I don't know that any shark has tested us like this shark, Brett, over hundreds and hundreds of sharks.
No, that's about as hard as we ever had to pull one to get her in there. And I mean, you can imagine, like, normally I think these sharks swimming around about 3.5 knots, maybe 4 knots on average, just kind of depending on the size of the shark and their cruising speed. And that's what I'm trying to match when I get in front of them and say, okay, I want to settle everything down. So the shark's swimming at its natural speed. We're basically just there to dictate the direction, not really pull hard on it. And then if you slide past the ship and now the current picks up to 2.5, 3 knots possibly. And now if you slid past it a quarter mile or half mile, that same speed that you're trying to do in a still water, you're only going to be like half knot. And you're just going to take forever to get back to the ship. And then that's increasing the fight time, the time at least on the hook. This environment is really, really difficult. This arc was also before I put those posts on the inside. So I didn't have the technique of jumping all the way across the cradle and then putting it over the pin. We got really lucky that Mary Lee actually stayed in a straight line and didn't want to swim outside the platform again, because she could have done that.
Well, I remember when I was driving, if you go back and watch the video again, you'll see I did something that we don't have to do anymore, is I actually put the contender straight in front on the front side of the lift. So the straight line to pull her in. Nowadays, I don't need to do that. I can go beside it. You jump over, you put the line over the pin. It creates a V in the rope and it pulls the shark right in. And now here we are above the cradle with ripping current. Like if something happens, we're going to plow down in on top of you and everybody else. Yeah. And because we were in front of the cradle and the current was so strong and she was so tight, we could just try to drive forward and pull her straight in, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. And if you remember when we were in South Africa, I didn't have the pin there either. And I was mostly jumping in, but we didn't have as much current. Yeah. And so I was able to jump in and kind of grab the line and walk it to the front end of the platform and pull the shark almost to my feet and then climb out of the way before it got to me. But this was not going to work in that situation. If I tried to do that, I would get swept off the platform really fast. So I realized as soon as I jump in, I had to hold on to that wall and climb up on it and just stay out of you guys' way until she was up and in there. And I need to still be in there. I mean, one of the things I think we should probably let people know is one of the reasons I'm in there is not just to get the shark onto the platform, but as soon as we do get it on the platform, it really needs to be recentered so we can get access to both sides of the shark and then position it so we can get an internal tag and all that stuff. Somebody has to be there to do that, because otherwise it'll end up with its nose way up in the corner. We won't have access like we need to.
Yeah, so he centers the shark in the lift. So that was interesting to relive. I'm glad we didn't talk about this before this. It's because it all feels really raw.
So real quick, Chris, you guys get obviously tough battle. You get the shark in the lift. She swims off safely, but then the name was very important to you.
So, and you got to remember, going back to the early part of this conversation, when this happened, I thought it was going to be the last shark we ever touched. I mean, even though we got one, I still thought that it was all over. And it was just trying to have it be as least damaging as possible to everybody's family, not just me, but everybody's family, everybody. We've been working together on the water at this time, 15 years or 12 years. It's like families, And so I named it Mary Lee after my mom, because I thought it was the last shark we would ever touch. Right. And, my parents have done it so much for me. And I wanted to just honor my mom and try to thank my parents for all they had done to help, build a situation where you actually believed you could pull off something like this, and they supported you and didn't say you were crazy if you had a big dream. And so I wanted to honor my mom, Mary Lee. There she is. She's amazing. She's about 86 years old right now, still doing well with a couple of her grandchildren. She always used to ask me back in the day, when am I going to have some grand sharks? Wondering if Mary Lee was pregnant and going to show us where she gave birth, which is a whole nother part of the story. But you got to remember, at this time, even though this has occurred, as amazing as it was, we felt satisfied because we tagged another shark on that trip named Jeannie, named after Jeannie Clark. So in 30 days at sea, we ended up with 2. And what was interesting is all the press that came out, they wanted to tell the story and they weren't there. So we were able to send them the, pictures of Mary Lee and Jeannie and a little video. We didn't hardly have any video on the trip, or we were broke. We didn't have our camera crew out there. We had like a couple of volunteers. And so we didn't really have much. That's why when you see this, you don't see like the kind of films you saw before that time or since that time. And we all went back, and I think I remember saying something to Brett like, man, I got enough cash to pay everybody for about 90 days. I got to, if I don't pull something off in 90 days, it is over. And it's just going to be trying to like pick up the pieces of what's left.
But that's not what happened. In fact, this fin, Chris, kind of changed everything. This is kind of an iconic. A lot of longtime OCSEARCH fans. This fin is very distinct, very unique, with that little notch taken out of it.
Yeah, the notch.
And this is a little bit off topic, but a lot of people ask, why is that notch there? Just real quick.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, Brett and I have talked about it a few times. We can both guess at it. When you look at it real close here, you can see like, even though it has that little notch out of it, it's real thin as it proceeds back to where it gets to the normal fin, where it's much, much thicker. Like on an animal like this, the top of that fin is several inches thick, right? It is a beefy, it's thick. And I don't know, wrapped up in a long line, hit propped. Another shark, taking a chunk out of her, maybe during mating. What do you think, Brett?
Brett, you're on mute.
You're muted.
Yeah. I don't know. I keep on thinking about it. It looks so perfect. It was almost like you would think like a little small shark bite or something like that. But who knows? It could be any number of things.
But to me, I think when I see that notch is old. You can see the original wound goes much deeper in, where that texture is, to about a couple inches there from the tag, and then that seems like that's the part that's filling back in. It looks like it was a pretty good chunk.
So
nobody knows.
I think it's there for when it's traveling at sunset, so the sun can fit just perfectly.
For her brand, she knew she wanted to be unique.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on that real quick. Moving forward, so obviously that's not what happened. This was 2012 we're talking about, and OCSEARCH is still going. So, despite the dire situation.
Yeah, so from there, you got to remember at that time, people didn't know where the sharks went like we know now, right? Everybody's been following sharks since this time, and we got a real good understanding. And we were stunned when she went down off the southeastern coast and was spending so much time off the southeast, sticking her nose in rivers and estuaries. And what happened was, it was the first time the public could see it in real time at the same time as the scientists, and so they got really involved in this track, and she proceeded down off the Carolinas, and then inspired a friend of ours here, Mr. Jim. Yeah, and maybe you can talk about the first time when she headed down your way, and then we'll pick it up from there.
I was gonna say, so the tracker launches at around this time, and media is picking up on it, but also Jim, very important person, picked up on it. And Jim, walk us through. You see something on the tracker, and what you did next quite literally changed the trajectory of OCSEARCH. And we'll get into a little bit more of that now. But I'm curious to just hear what you thought and what you did.
Yeah, I was working at the Star News newspaper here in Wilmington at that time. I'm retired from there now, but we had been watching on TV some news reports and seen some other media reports about this great white shark that was tagged and moving, across close to the coast of Wilmington, off of Wrightsville Beach. And so my friend and I, Cassie Foss and I, were sitting there. It was November 28th, I believe, and around 3:00 in the afternoon, and we're sitting there going like, I wonder if that shark has a Twitter account. And I don't even know why it crossed our minds. And so I just did a quick search, didn't see any Twitter account for a Mary Lee shark, and so right then I just created one. And I think the first tweet was something about eating red drum fish, and we kind of made a play on the Shining. Remember when they look in the mirror and they see red rum, and that suddenly we had like 300 people following that account, and it just was like, huh. I've never had an account that had more than 50 at that time, because Twitter was still pretty new, novel. And I thought, well, it sounds like we got something here. So just continued to tweet as a shark about what she was eating, where she was going, and just kept picking up followers. And I don't know how long it was, Chris, before we hooked up. I think I can remember the phone call we had where we were just talking about, hey, what are we going to do with this account? Because suddenly we were getting some attention. I think suddenly we had 300, and then it's kind of stayed. I think we got up to 1,000, and gradually I think we had like 8,000, and then it was what was it, 2015, right, Chris, when things just went crazy.
Why, Chris, is what Jim did so important? Why was it such a pivotal thing for OCSEARCH?
Well, one of our core values, like, look, if we're gonna, people need to step back, and I see some people out here like Parker Bankston's on, right? And I see a lot of people like Ray Kelly and other people I know, and I see some Mary Lees, and we do our work because we're trying to make sure that all of our kids and kids can eat food. And I think so many people think it's like we're a shark program. It's just that the path to that goes through these large animals. And so if these animals are doing well, the system is balanced, and then there's food for the future. And so I always felt like if we were going to really pull that off, it was going to take everybody, like every person. And so that's why we started the tracker. It was to be inclusive. And so when Jim started that handle, I remember people came to me and said like, oh, hey, man, he can't do that. Mary Lee's our shark, and things like that, like this old way of thinking. And I'm like, no, man, this is great. Here we have someone who's so interested. They're getting involved. Let's just call them up and talk to them and let them understand a few of our values, like we're data driven and we're centrist. We're not like a fringy environmental group or a fringy preservationist group, or, we're solution oriented. And, we talk about science and we talk about data, and Jim was totally on board with that. And so we began, and he's a great writer. And he's funny, and it's just, look, if we do all this, everything's going to sound like us, and we need more voices. And so we had a great call, and we just started working with him on amplifying him, so that we could take what, even at that time, we had little reach, and amplify what he was doing. And, to go back to the people that covered when trying to cover us catching a shark on that trip when we caught Mary Lee, that weren't there when we sent them pictures and we sent them imagery, everybody told the story. So there was a pretty big pop at the beginning, but it was like, it's a cool story, but what does that mean? And then Jim, she swam down the coast, and Jim, no, that was 2012, 2013. And he started giving the sharks a voice, which was a whole new idea for us. And then people could engage with Mary Lee. And then we could use the Mary Lee's voice to start talking about, what might she be doing here? What might she be doing there? And then, she continued to be so coastal that every single community that she went by on the East Coast told the story of Mary Lee. So suddenly there was this radical amount of press around her, like town to town to town to town, all the way down the coast. And then in early 13, around January, she started hanging out right under the pier of Jacksonville Beach. And I was sitting out here, I'm out west right now, and it was like a blizzard. And she pinged in right underneath the pier there. It's a surf spot. I didn't know what to do. It's the first time we ever had a shark on a tracker do that. I was like, I felt like I got to call somebody. And so I called the Jacksonville Beach Police Department. Said, hey, man, there's a white shark underneath the pier. We're tracking it. It's a 4,000-pound shark, roughly. And they saw the tracker, they shut down the beach, and then like a couple hours later, she pinged in 3 miles off the beach, and they opened it back up. And that created a whole nother wave of Mary Lee explosion in awareness around OCSEARCH and our work, and it also exploded Jim's handle, and it really began to roll. And so here I am in the middle of all this. I'm trying to build the enterprise, right? I'm trying to make sure we can actually do what everyone's watching so we can pay for it. And I thought about it, and I was like, is there another way to create value for companies that want to participate in creating an abundant future for the planet? Because we had 40 million viewers a year on television, roughly. But suddenly, in one quarter, Mary Lee swam down the eastern seaboard between September and the end of December, and she drove 1.25 billion earned media impressions through the press.
Jim, what's that like to be the person in the driver's seat of all of this? What is that? Tell us what that experience is like.
Well, I was having fun. I think at that time I had a little BlackBerry, and my thumbs were about to fall off from tweeting because I was getting so many followers. And at that time I was trying to follow everybody who followed the Mary Lee account, and at the same time, she was so active that I was constantly updating the Twitter account. I always told people at work, I said, I don't smoke, but I take Twitter breaks because I got to keep up with Mary Lee. I'd head outside and stand out in the parking lot and, tweet about this shark. And, first thing I did in the morning, the last thing I did at night was, where's this shark and what's she doing? It was kind of fun. It was a lot of fun, but it was crazy too. And then, later on, Chris, remember the media attention to the account started happening. People wanted to interview Mary Lee. And so then that got crazy as well. And then you start feeling this sense of responsibility. It's not just about fun. You got to get this, you feel this obligation to get this message out about, shark conservation, OCSEARCH, what they're doing, other people, what they're doing with sharks, legislation, just all those things started, piling on, and it got to be, a big responsibility.
People didn't know about sharks back then like they do now, so you were starting from scratch. And then Jim, what did her account peak out at? Wasn't it like 165,000 Twitter followers or something?
Yeah, it's at 130,000 now. I think we had 131 or so. Yeah.
Brad, I got a question for you. You're one of the smartest guys I know, hands down. But social media, I'm aware, is not one of your strong suits. But all this is kind of going on in the background. I'm curious. You catch the sharks. What is your perception of all of this? That's had to have been a little strange for you.
You mean the social media part of it here?
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel a little left out sometimes just because of I got kind of a little mental block when it comes to computers. Well, I grew up dyslexic, severely dyslexic. So I think just staring at too many of these things, I just start getting tired sooner. So I don't really engage the same way. I'm a little sorry about that. I wish I would have learned a little sooner and become a little more involved in the beginning, because I see how at first I was like, this is kind of crazy. It kind of gets in my way. Used to be the cameras that get in my way, and now it's just all this other stuff. It's like a side thing, but it's awesome, and I'm glad that the rest of you guys are so good at it and drawing everybody in, because when I'm out there doing this, you don't want to just have 3 people get something out of it. You want it to mean something. There's a lot that goes into it, and this gives it all so much more meaning, and bringing everybody, being inclusive for everybody. And it's you have to be, I'm not thick-skinned enough to handle some of the negative stuff that we hear, but it's like 99.9% positive. So it's all new to me, but I'm enjoying it. This is about as heck as I get right here.
So
Mary Lee, it turned out to be like a super important shark, right?
Yeah, so that's where I wanted to go. Brett helped catch the shark. Jim helps explode popularity. Mary Lee continues on her journey, and she just starts cracking things wide open. And you could go on forever about this, Chris, but we're looking at her full track here.
But I think to go back to the story this is a 5-year track. So things explode with Jay, the press explodes. I'm trying to figure out, how are we going to hold this together? And I end up getting in touch with this guy named Chris Bosley at Caterpillar, who connects me with this person at Caterpillar Marketing. His name is Archie. I can't remember his last name right now. And I remember calling Brett. I'm like, Brett, I got an in. I got, we're out of time, but I got one shot. And someone got me to a lunch with the president of Caterpillar. And I told him about what we were doing, and he was interested in it. And then I got a meeting with marketing at Caterpillar, and I told him our history and what we were trying to do. There's Caterpillar engines in the ship. And then because of that exposure and scale, we had value. And marketing was changing a lot at the time, going from traditional marketing to a lot of online stuff and social stuff. And Caterpillar really took a risk. We don't work with Caterpillar anymore. We haven't for years. But at that time, they came in, and Archie was the main guy who got it through, and Chris Bosley, and they stepped up and like, you're doing good work, man. And they stepped up and they funded our whole operation for 3 years. And that gave us an opportunity. They said, look, in 3 years, you should be able to help turn some other people onto this, so you can get some other people other than just us. And then Costa came in. Costa had been with us for 15 years, but that was through TV. And they transitioned over, and Yeti transitioned over. These people have been helping us since like the early 2000s. But at that moment, Caterpillar came in with a big check and funded us for 3 years, and then was supplemented by Costa and Yeti. And that allowed us to then build a stable platform after that 3 years to come off of the Caterpillar funding and have a diversified portfolio of people to pay for it, built on our old partnerships around Costa and Yeti.
And just to kind of drive the point home, Chris, just how important was Jim's work to making sure something like that could happen?
Well, I think it was very important. The press was what they had the tremendous value on, but the handle was how to engage with the press and how to engage with, the public. And so, a huge component of that. But the real story, I think, behind it was science is typically so closed. And I was watching the Emmys, and there was that guy who won the Emmy for the best supporting actor for the Dallas Buyers Club or whatever, with Matthew McConaughey, his supporting actor, that guy, long black hair. He handed his Emmy to the lady who was interviewing him, and she's like, I can't believe you're handing your Emmy around. And the guy said, you got to give it away if you want to hold on to it. And that just laid me back, because I was trying to go after this inclusion, and I was like, that's it. From this point forward, we have to give everything away. And then, Jim came along, and we gave, he picked up Mary Lee. We wanted to give that away. We wanted to grow with him. We wanted to be inclusive. And it built the model for how OCSEARCH operates from that point forward. So with Caterpillar, a lot of it was the press that had value. We were driving real scale, and in the pictures, there was pictures and people had on Caterpillar shirts and various things. But then Jim gave us a whole nother layer to engage with people. So it was hugely important.
Jim, did you have any idea it would turn into something like this when you started a handle?
Oh, I had no idea. Like my only experience before had been with newspaper Twitter accounts, which then were so new that we were so excited to get 50 followers, But, when I was looking back here, I said, December 2014, we had 6,000 followers on the Mary Lee account. And then it was like in April 2015, started to go crazy. And then by May of 2015, we had 65,000 followers. It jumped that quick. And that was as she headed up through New Jersey, New York, and the national media jumped all over the account, as well as what OCSEARCH was doing.
So as we start running out of time here a little bit, Chris. Well, first of all, Jim, as you did that, I mean, people just fell in love with your personality. All of it, behind that account, that was Jim, and so that's why we call this a little bit of an unmasking. That the voice behind the shark, that is Jim, and so thank you for Jim for that. But as we start running out of time here, Chris, we're looking at Mary Lee's full track, and like I started saying, you could go on forever with all of the big things that she helped us understand. But can you just hit the three most important things that Mary Lee helped us achieve in unraveling the white shark puzzle?
First of all, we had no idea they were spending all this time down in the winter right off the coast of the southeastern United States. It turns out these animals spend more time there than they do up north. But no one sees them. It's wintertime, the water's murky, and they're invisible. Think about Mary Lee. We tracked her for 5 years. We knew where she was. No one ever saw her. That's how stealthy these things are. Brett will always tell you, they're invisible if they want to be. And so the southeastern United States thing, no one really knew much about, and that's now we know they're major overwintering habitats. She showed us that they use Bermuda. We didn't know that. This big offshore loop she made, we believe that's where she was gestating, and then she came off from there. And you can see, boom, she shot straight into the south shore of Long Island. We went in there. We found the pupping grounds. We tagged 19, I think, pups, young of the year pups. They showed us the nursery between Long Island down to South Carolina. She revealed, one shark, now that we've seen other sharks do things and we're starting to put more science behind their blood and their hormones and sperm and reproductive work and diet, she was enormous to have this be like the second shark ever tagged in the North Atlantic history with a spot tag. And she is just transformational. Not only for the business and its current model today, for keeping it alive so that we even exist today, but also for the scientists to really create a cornerstone of data from which to leap from.
I think too, Chris, your work and Mary Lee helped to reverse the whole Jaws mentality in the world, not just in the United States, in the whole world.
Well, we did know when we started this project that we had to shift the tone of the conversation away from Jaws to away from fear to like fascination and understanding, which is what we used to say, from back in the day. And shift, because people, even if people understood how important they were, if they were still had this fear from Jaws, they might not want to look after them. But here you can tell you got a 4,000-pound white shark living on the beach. We're all swimming with them every day and nothing's happening. And so when Jim came out with this Twitter handle, we're like, oh my God, that's the voice for the shark. That is the way to shift the tone of the conversation so that people can understand how important they are. And without them, there's no food for our kids. And so, yeah, tremendous on that aspect as well. That probably more important than the science, right? Because we got a lot of we got 55 sharks in the North Atlantic tag now, giving us data. But shifting the tone of the conversation, the shark like Mary Lee, shark like Catherine, those two themselves alone have probably towed 90% of that line.
And then when you look at the tracks and you see how coastal she is, that people are going to look at that and go, oh, they're going to even think about it even more, like how coastal. And you remember when we started out, when we were in Guadalupe Island, it's way offshore. 220 miles from San Diego, like 160 off the beach, and it's deep water. And then we started moving, looking for the juveniles up off of the beach in Malibu and San Onofre and stuff. And then we went to South Africa, and everything was inshore, right? We didn't have any islands to fish off, and none of that deep water stuff. And we need, protection for the boat to work and everything. But our understanding of where the sharks spend most of their time, water depth, when they're on the coast, started coming into a picture. And then remember when we were like in Straits Bay and Mossel Bay and some other places, when you might show up and get a shark or two in the beginning, then it got a little tougher and you'd have to start looking up and moving around and looking. And I remember starting to like investigate river mouths and estuaries and stuff a little more, and that's where we'd start finding more of them. So when we put this tag on Mary Lee, and she went down and started poking around in estuaries and river mouths and stuff like that, it all started making more sense. And then, as we got more and more of them, you could see how much of their life is coastal. And then that just means that there's more interaction than people really realize there are. So the few incidents that do happen, you got to the percentage is so low for them to. They're just so stealthy. They could be right underneath you, right next to you. Like when people also you'd get a lot of scientists and other people would say, well, what are they eating? There's no seals there and this and that, and they can't catch small stuff. They can catch anything they want to, and they're just so stealthy, and some people would feel like it's too much energy for them to chase it down. But spending my whole life in the water as a spear fisherman, I can get as close. The whole idea of spearfishing is getting as close to the animal as you can. It's not like being a good shot from far away. And the better you get, you can reach up and touch some fish. You can touch tuna and other stuff. If I can do that, Mary Lee can do whatever she wants. Sneak up on anything she wants and just slurp it down.
Yeah. And the fact that she's we would see where she was, and then there'd be big bait runs, and she's just in there on a large biomass of menhaden, just slurping them up at her leisure. And then she's on the red drum run and on the black drum run. Sharks move from event to event to event. And it's not all about big stuff. It's not all about seals. Like when we started our work, they used to say things like white sharks only eat seals after they're mature. Now we know from all of our diet work, they eat some marine mammal, but it's a small percentage of their diet. They primarily eat fish and squid and stuff like that. Now, if they get a shot at a dead whale, they'll scavenge that. And then they go up north in the summer and they fatten up on some seals. But we're seeing from our diet work and nutrition work up there, they're eating some seals, but they're still also eating a lot of fish and squid while they're up there. They eat whatever they want, whenever they want. I don't think I ever really understood that until you really took me through that a number of years ago. Just like a big lion, it eats whatever it wants, whenever it wants.
Yeah, there's studies on billfish where they've found stuff in their stomach, like giants, like 1,200-pound marlin with tiny little baits in there that don't swim in schools. So it's like, I think that sometimes, just the evolution, you grow up eating small stuff, sometimes even, and you can see, like, if you're offshore, you're going to be eating offshore stuff. And if you're inshore, you're going to be eating inshore stuff. And you see how much time they're spending there, and then you look at all the other runs, and you go, you can infer their diet before you even, take samples and actually study it.
So, John, why don't we jump over and hey, you guys, Brett and Jim, if you look on the right-hand side of your screen and you click on where it says live comments, a lot of people have left comments. So I'm gonna go through a few of these and try to answer them. Captain Ray Kelly, what was the name of your boat before OCSEARCH? It was called the Go Fish, FISCH, like my last name, Fisher. And that was the boat we used for offshore adventures way back in the day, from the late 90s into the early 2000s. Here's someone from down there who was living when Mary Lee was coming through at Pamlico Sound and Hatteras. She was all through there. Our chief scientist is on here, Bob Huter, want to note that Mary Lee was the first to show us Bermuda, but Unamaki, another big giant female like Mary Lee, is in Bermuda right now. We're only seeing these big giant females go out there, which is starting to make us believe that's once they're pregnant, they go out there to gestate their babies, right? Low risk lifestyle, deep diving, eating squid on the deep scattering layer and various other fish.
One question that I've seen a couple times is, why can't we recapture Mary Lee?
I'll let you handle that one, Brett.
Yeah, that's a common misperception. People don't understand our tag technology, first of all, that well. But even if our tag technology was perfect and you knew exactly where it was all the time, it would, when it stuck its fin out of the water, it would be very hard to get on it ever again. When I try to, I tell people sometimes like this: if I'm looking in my binoculars and I see a fin breaking the surface of the water, and I've got everything ready, and I go, okay, there's a shark right there. Let's go bait that shark. If it drops its, and I'm 100 yards away from it, when it puts its fin under the water and it doesn't pop right back up, and I realize that it changed its depth just a little bit, my chances of catching that particular shark, even though I was within 100 yards of it, just went down. I mean, by the second, they're just plummeting. You have no idea where it is, really. So they're not just, I mean, they're a little boat shy too, especially this species. It's not like you can just run up on them and not spook them off. Part of the time, some of the time they're really curious, come up to you. Some of the time they're just boat shy, and approaching them is not the best way. Getting in front of them and having them come to you, if you have a time for a chum slick or something like that, maybe. But then it's still really hard to do. But the reality of it is our tags aren't that way anyway. So they're.
It would have to be a gift from the ocean. We would have to just be working and she swam up. It's impossible to pursue her with the tag.
Yeah, I couldn't do it. And I mean, if anybody can do it, I think I'd have the best chance at it. And I can't do it. It's just impossible.
Yeah, but we could be working off of Massachusetts one fall and Mary Lee swims up to the boat, but that would just have to be a gift from the gods and a gift from the ocean. But there is no way to pursue that. We get that question a lot, you know. So, you have any other questions there, John? I'm just reading through here
there's a couple more, but we're running out of time here. So
it's okay if we go a few minutes long.
Yeah. The one question was Mary Lee pregnant when we tagged her?
No, we don't believe so. Based on all the science that we've done so long, we don't believe that the pregnant females are up feeding off of Massachusetts or Nova Scotia. So no, and the sharks since then, the females that we've ultrasounded in that area, we've not ever had in Nova Scotia or in Massachusetts, have never ultrasounded a pregnant white shark. In fact, I don't know where the number is right now. We've tagged somewhere between 100 and 200 white sharks around the world. We have never ultrasounded a female that was pregnant, which is another thing that leads us to believe that this big offshore stuff is where they're gestating, because we're seeing them in places, we're ultrasounding them in places, and we are not seeing pregnant sharks when we handle them. So that means they're pregnant somewhere else, right?
Another good question that just came in. We've talked about opening our headquarters in Jacksonville. Is there a chance that we could set up something pseudo-permanent, say, up in Nova Scotia, which, Lydia led us to, and Mary Lee led us to?
Hilton took us up there. Yeah. Do I see a future where there's field offices for OCSEARCH around various parts of their migratory loop so that we don't need to move a ship around? We have something in Nova Scotia and something in various places where there is predictable access. Sure. We have a great partner up there. We work with Rick Wellsford, who has a nonprofit up there who we work with. And, but yeah, we're trying to give this method away to people. The problem is most people don't have any boats or any money. That's why you just got to be like, thank God for the Costas and the Yetis and the bourbon and the beer and the SeaWorlds of the world. These people are paying for this work. I don't think people see the work and they don't think about, like, how do you pay the bill for that? It costs $2 million a year to get 3 trips away to scientists. So, but yeah, I'd love to see OCSEARCH field stations around different parts of the world as we give OCSEARCH away to the future. My big thing I'm trying to make sure right now is OCSEARCH transcends any individual's lifespan. Brett's trying to train the crew to bring them up. So when he and I are old, we're just sitting on the deck pointing our fingers. I'm trying to make sure the financial model is solid so that when we're gone, it can still be paid for. And Jacksonville University and our main headquarters there in Mayport is a big part of creating that capacity to transcend any individual's lifespan. And then field offices around the world, I think, are natural that stem from there.
Real quick, Chris, when is our next expedition?
Our next expedition is scheduled for Massachusetts in August and September in Nova Scotia. And we are battling, through this COVID thing. It's impacted our funding. We're definitely doing Massachusetts, and we are scrapping as hard as we can right now to raise enough money to pay for Nova Scotia in September.
Cool. We'll make this the last question, kind of an easy one. How much does each tag cost, Chris?
Each tag, a spot tag, once it's all painted up and ready to go, is about $2,000. If you put a PSAT, one of those pop-off tags on that tells you their dive profiles and the temperature of water, we don't use them for tracking because of the error, but they're getting better. Those are more expensive. I think those are another $2,500. And then the little internal acoustic that goes in that works with the acoustic arrays that everybody has all over, that lasts for 10 years, and those cost around $600-700. So at any one time, if a shark can be cruising off with about $5,000 with tags on it.
Excellent. Well, I do want to thank all of you for being here. Brett, Jim, Chris, and an even bigger thank you to everybody who joined this presentation. If you really liked it, go ahead and click the share button and spread it around. Let people know about it. But really, just thank you very much to everybody who participated. Jim, any last words before we sign off?
No, thank you very much for having me on, and I look forward to the future of what OCSEARCH is going to do, tagging more sharks, exploring more oceans. Can't wait.
We're so grateful to you, Jim. We are so, so grateful. You know, we've been working so hard trying to survive and keep moving. Like, this has been a moment for me to think back about this and how it unfolded, and I'm just really grateful. I'm just really grateful.
And I don't have the official say over this, but Chris, you might. Jim, I guess hopefully we get to see you on the ship soon. If
Jim comes whenever he wants. He just calls and he comes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Brett, anything?
Thank you, Jim, too. Thank you, everybody, for showing up here and taking interest and supporting us.
Cool.
And if you want to leave it up for a minute, John, even though the program's over, I'll zip through these questions and answer questions for anybody who wants to stick around, you know, just real fast.
Yeah, go for it. We'll
I'd be happy to, too.
Yeah, let's so thank you to everybody. If you have any other questions, now is the time to fire them off. And we'll sort of do a rapid fire as anything else comes in. I'm scrolling through, looking here, Chris.
Yeah, we got a lot of people who've been following us since Mary Lee, so they've been following OCSEARCH for a long time now.
What can viewers do to help?
What can viewers do to help? Hey, man, well, stop using single-use plastic. Turn the water off when you're brushing your teeth. You know, be a responsible human. My son, Luke, come on, Luke, you can come over. My son's been he's doing his homework and he needs help.
A giraffe.
Oh, a giraffe. Excellent drawing. Nice. Got some people here from England. You know, people, what can they do? You know, I think the most important thing for all of us to shape the future of the ocean is when you're buying things that you're consuming for your normal life, buy from companies that are contributing to the future of the planet, right? It's called conscious capitalism in today's lingo. But, you know, if you're going to buy a cooler anyway, buy from a company that is taking a portion of that money and creating an abundant future. Same with your sunglasses. Go visit the places that are funding the research and the data to help us get there. If we start doing that with every single thing we buy, like I saw a car company the other day, like if you went down and took a test drive, they delivered 10 Meals on Wheels to people in need. Go buy from those people. Vote with your dollar, because then it will become in the company's best interest to not only make business, but to create a bright future for people in the planet. I think that's the biggest thing. I don't want to try to like push our people right now. But in this conversation, we have people like that who help us. But generally speaking, in all your consumption around your life, that the stuff you need in the day-to-day level, buy from the companies that are doing good, because then it will become in companies' best interests to do good. And that's how we'll radically increase the capacity to support science and exploration, because it'll be, people will buy from the companies that are doing good. That's the best thing that people can do. If you want to help us, you know, you can buy a pair of Costa Shades or Yeti Cooler or go on our site and buy our stuff. But I think more importantly is the big picture.
What about donations? Do those help?
Yeah, donations are hugely helpful. You know, you can go to OCSEARCH.org and hit the donate button, you know, and we're grateful for all of those things. And that hits the water, hits the ship, you know, right to the scientists. So one thing about OCSEARCH is we are lean, and our money goes to getting scientists out on the water and giving them the capacity to do things they've never been able to do before.
Really quick, Brett, this one's for you. You could make this as long as possible, but since this is rapid fire, let's make it quick. Can you briefly describe the gear that you use to catch a shark like Mary Lee?
Yeah, it's pretty simple gear, actually. You know, we don't use rod and reel on these big sharks. We would have very little control. So I use standard is 3/32 stainless cable, 7x19. It has about a 950-pound breaking strength. I use a 20-aught 5X hook. 20-aught hook is about the size of my palm. It's a, you know, we used to use a 27-aught. If we get a real large shark show up next to the boat, we might probably still would go back to it, especially if there's a lot of current. I use about 30 to 45 foot of that cable leader, but nowadays I wrap the cable leader. I actually embed it in a piece of polypropylene rope. It ends up going from, I take a piece of polypropylene that's 3-strand twisted, and I twist the 3/32 cable into it. Then I put another strand of poly over the top of it, so it makes 4 strands over one. That ends up making it easier for me to wrap up on the leader. So if I have a 45 foot leader now, if the shark wrapped up, let's say a shark with a 12-foot circumference wrapped up in a leader that's 30 feet long, it only has to wrap up a couple times before the leader is completely used up on its body. Now, if it bites the rope, it can actually bite its way off and then be wrapped up, and we have a real problem there. So our the leaders are pretty long for that reason, which makes it really difficult if I was trying to wrap up and pull 45-foot leader by hand with just gloves on. It's dangerous and hard on my hands. So when we embed it in that rope, I can basically treat it like a rope. It's a lot easier on my hands, and I can put the long line clips that are attached to our buoys closer and closer and closer as I am able to pull the shark closer. So it goes from a 20-aught circle hook with the bait on it. We have about 18 to 24 inches of a short, open, naked cable leader to a ring. That ring is there so we can attach the buoys at the end, so the shark can't dive under the platform at the end of the battle. Then it goes to the 45 foot leader that's embedded, and then from there it goes to Samson braid rope. We have about 300 Samson braid rope that we put in a basket. So we use a series of buoys, smaller to larger, as they come up the line. The smaller one closer to the bait. That way, if it's a surface bait and it gets bit, the buoy does the setting of the hook before it has a chance to. We use bite blockers so they can't swallow the bait very deep. There's all kinds of things we do to make sure the shark does not get the hook deep in its mouth. It has to be.
Well, I think, and then to get beyond the technical gear of that, I think it's important for people to understand that Brett, I don't really think catches sharks anymore. He quickly trains them. When we started capturing these animals, it would take us 3.5 hours to get control of a shark like Mary Lee, and now Brett will do that in about 35 minutes. And I think that's important for people to understand, because of all the science over the years, we've learned that the biggest thing that stresses out the shark is time on the hook. From the time you hook it to the time the hook is removed. It has nothing to do with the cradle. It's all about time on the hook. We now know from our blood work that the cradle, the sharks are actually, over half of the sharks are recovering in the cradle. They're actually improving their blood physiology.
Elaborate a little more on that. When we first started, like I said, in Guadalupe, it was real deep water. We'd have to fight those sharks and pull them up to the surface, and it was a different kind of battle. When we started finding how we'd find a lot more sharks in 80 feet of water or less, and sometimes we were fishing as little as 15 feet right next to the beach. So you can imagine if a shark's in shallow water, let's say it's in 25 feet of water and it's a 15-foot shark, it can't go down. So it can only go out across the surface, and gives you a chance to just run out in front of them. You can't do that with a rod and reel, but on this heavier tackle, if you figure out which direction they're going, get in front of them, pull the slack and the belly out as you pass them, and then you're able to control the direction. They can't put on the brakes like a stubborn mule or a dog that doesn't want to go for a walk. They're streamlined. So if you get in front of them, you disadvantage them, and then you can basically pull hard enough to where they realize that they are helpless against this new technique, and they learn and they give up pretty quick. So sometimes, we're talking 30, 35 minutes on some of that stuff, but that a lot of it really is us bringing the shark back to the boat. We use accelerometers now on our leaders that we're able to analyze later and actually get an idea of how the battle went from the bite and then through the fight time until we put the buoys on, and then bring it into the cradle. We can analyze it much closer now. There's actually some of the accelerometer data has showed 0 fight time, because we're able to get them in shallow enough water, and then like if they had a reef or a beach on one side, I knew which direction it was going to go, and I got in front of the shark before it ever even pulled, and then the shark never even changed direction, and we just walked right. Yeah, accelerometer data shows that. So I could say some sharks are a minute or less, and have almost no pressure put on them.
So I think now let's take this to another level, because we're deep in this, and anyone who's still here, this is not something we've really had an opportunity to share with a lot of people. So you go from dealing with these sharks in the deeper water, you got the gear all dialed in, simplified, you got the cable in the rope, so it minimizes the impact on your hands and on the animal. And then we go to this setup where you create the breakaway drum line. And in particular on this last trip, I want you to talk to people about how it would break away and what would most people think you would do when you went to pick it up versus what you do when you go to pick it up and how that unfolds.
Yeah, so when it breaks away, the shark, a lot of times the shark is not even really moving very far. It's like, okay, as the buoys separated, and we'll see, okay, when it's attached, the buoys are pretty close to each other. All of a sudden, look, oh, there's a little separation between the buoys. Let's go over and get on it. But you're not going in there to start pulling and start getting in some big tug of war with it. You're basically coming up, sneaking up behind it, pulling up the last buoy, creeping up to the next buoy, creeping up to the next buoy. And this time the sharks, you're just kind of following it, its direction, figuring out which way it's going. And then as you get toward the last buoy and you get most of the line up under the boat and in the basket, then you make the little slow crawl in front of them, hopefully not like alerting the shark too much. And then you got to, get into a little bit of a tussle before you can predict which way it's going again. But I don't like to battle them. I don't like to, if it wants to take off on a run, let him go. Just let it slide through your hands, control the line as it comes out of the basket, figure out which direction it's going. It's not going to continue, this real hard fight for very long. It's going to figure out it wants to settle down into a direction again. So then you just come back up and do it again. So it's really, you're trying not to fight the shark at all. You're just trying to sneak up and then get in front of it and outsmart it. And then,
yeah, this concept of sneaking up, like I was out there with you, the buoys get pulled away from the anchor line. Brett and the guys are going up there. They're picking up the end of the line. And then if the ship is a little bit over to the right and the shark is kind of slowly moving, not toward it, they'll kind of just put a little bit of pressure on it and almost just steer the shark so it actually swims to the ship. It doesn't even know that it's happening. I think most people don't understand how far along you are in understanding the concept of learned helplessness with the science team and the veterinarians out of SeaWorld and every other place. We've really brought the practical and the academic together. And I mean, I just think it would be stunning to people if they knew how little most of the sharks you're catching now, there is no fight. They have been slowly steered back to the ship. And before they know it, you put a couple buoys on them and they're in the cradle. It's the crazy, there is no, I think when people visualize dealing with an animal like this, they're thinking some sort of old man in the sea, and it is so stealth and so quiet. And so I think people see you too, Brett, you're a big, strong guy handling a big animal and they think you're going to go in there, but you're out thinking these things, not out fighting them.
Yeah. I don't want to put that much pressure on them. And I mean, to me, it's and I love the accelerometer being on there because now it's like my report card. Now I can go and try to do better every time. You can't do that in the deep water as well, but in the shallow water, you definitely can.
Well, what I think is so cool is you guys have been at this now for a decade, and yet you're still improving the process, making it safer and safer and safer for the shark. Like the accelerometers, everything you do is trying to improve the process to the point.
Yeah, and I would say we've been dealing with sharks since 2007. Brett's been at this since he was 4 years old. And every experience and every day on the water as a kid in the long-range tuna fleet and every experience and learning is culminating with an individual who has the capacity to capture things for scientists that have never been captured before in a way they've never been captured before. He thinks different. He's the most creative man I've ever met on the water. He's the most gifted waterman I've ever known. I think that if we could get what he knows in his body about how the ocean works and in his mind and how everything is connected and how it works, and we can get that brain downloaded to scientists, it would make, and which is happening on the deck all the time, it makes a huge leap in what turns out to be peer-reviewed published papers that are leveraged for policy. So yeah, this is, and the idea of living in the biggest room in the world, right? The room for improvement is spread across the ship. He's sitting at home when he's not on the ship, trying to invent new things to make it easier on the animals every day. And I think
interesting test that we do a lot when we're walking a shark back to the boat. I call them walking it back. It's not really dragging them back. It's walking them back. And the reason why I say that, and they don't walk, they're swimming. But when we're in front of them, and let's say 5 minutes go by, and we're steering them back toward the boat, sometimes I'll just dump about 15 feet of line out of my hand and create a belly just to see what happens with the shark. And so often the shark will swim still following the boat for a minute or so before it starts wandering off, and I have to pull the belly back in and coax him back into to steer him back to the boat. But it just shows that that shark has gotten comfortable and is now swimming the same speed of the boat, following the bubbles of the boat, because that's what we've trained it to do.
It's like a dog on a loose leash.
Yeah.
Healing.
Yep.
Jim, I'm curious to bring you into all this. How that's got to be a lot of new information for you, huh?
Yeah, it's always fascinating to me to hear from the fishing team and what they're doing, because usually if you're out on the ship itself, then the contender is, can be miles away at times. So you don't actually get to see it up close. I usually don't see anything until when you bring a shark up to the cradle. That's usually the first view we get, the people who are visiting on the ship of what's happening. Then you see Brett jumping in the water there, which I can't even imagine how that goes. But yeah, this is all great stuff. And I think it makes people feel more comfortable with what the mission is, to understand the reverence and, appreciation you have for the animal.
Yeah.
Awesome. Chris, were there any other questions you wanted to jump on?
Somebody mentioned Paul Walker, super great guy, doing sad. He was great. We loved working with him. Someone's asking about the Eastern Gulf of Mexico. Julie, we think that is primarily where they're foraging on fish there. That's what we believe at the moment, that it's part of their migratory route where they're feeding. We've tried to figure out if it's worth taking the ship to the Eastern Gulf, but we don't have enough data. It's like the sharks are all spread out, so you'd probably never find one.
There was a question about St. Simon Island, Jekyll Island being a mating ground. What do we know about that, if anything?
Well, you hear, there's no data to suggest that it existed before OCSEARCH. We're very interested in that region. That's why we keep plugging away, even though it's tough to get a lot of sharks, to try to get, different samples from males and females. I would say our data does not suggest that is impossible. But we don't have the data set we need to confirm if that is the truth or not. We need more females from that area, and we need to do more hormone work and work like that. And that's kind of spreads across the whole puzzle. That's the one big missing piece of the puzzle, is this mating site. We're starting to think that a lot of it is opportunistic. I think most people don't know that these white sharks, the females, they have the capacity to store sperm in their body and use it later to kind of self-impregnate. So they don't necessarily have to mate on a cycle like, when a deer goes in the rut in the fall and they all mate and then they all give birth. These white sharks could opportunistically mate if they come across each other on a dead whale when it's not even close to time for her to be pregnant. She can then store that sperm. And then when she does come into season, maybe months and months later, she can release it and then become pregnant into her cycle. So it's starting to make us feel like that there might be a component of seasonality, maybe where some come together to mate, but also that they are taking advantage of a lot of opportunistic, chances that they may get. If 5 big white sharks come together around a dead whale, they don't come across each other that much. So they're probably not going to miss that opportunity. And then why would the female have the capacity to do that if she wasn't leveraging that? It would have been naturally selected out over the millions of years. So I don't think it's going to be a clear-cut answer when it comes out. I think it's going to be like there's some mating occurring in this general region, but it's not like all of them. And then they hook up whenever they can around the rest of the year.
I like it way better when the puzzle gets harder as you go on. More questions is more fun for me than more answers. Like a few answers here and there, then it's like, well, I got more complex. Now we get to go learn some more.
All right, I'm going to tap out. I'm emotionally exhausted. I had no idea this was going to be like this, but I loved it. I feel like I just went through therapy.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thanks, guys, for sticking around for some of those extra questions. We'll have a couple more presentations or a couple more live streams like this over the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned to our social media channels for when those will be. And with that, everybody, thank you, and we will sign off.
Thanks, everybody, for being a part of OCSEARCH. Thank you, John. Thank you, Brad.
Appreciate it.
John.
Okay. Stay well.